Hey everyone, Connor here today at etrailer.com. We're going to be taking a look at Redarc's Tow Pro Elite Trailer Brake Controller here for our 2018 Toyota 4Runner. So our Redarc Brake Controller here is going to be a proportional brake controller. And essentially what this means is it's going to apply a force to our trailer brakes proportional to what it is in the vehicle here. So for example, say we just need to come to a light stop, we're just going to be barely pressing on the brake pedal in our vehicle here. That means it's just going to send a small amount of force to the brakes on our trailer. However, if we need to come to a sudden stop, we really need to slow down the vehicle and trailer, and we slam on our brake pedal, it's going to send a lot of force to the brakes on our trailer to help us come to a stop safely and sooner. Also, with a proportional brake controller as opposed to a time delay brake controller, we're not going to have that delay between the brake pedal and the brakes being applied in our trailer. So one of the main draws of the Redarc Brake Controller here is going to be the hidden installation. Now essentially what this means is pretty much all the components that make up our brake controller are going to be installed behind the dash. They're not going to be visible to us. The only part that is going to be visible is going to be a very small control knob. And we'll show you in a second, that control knob, when done properly, it looks very factory-like. You're not even going to be able to tell that the brake controller wasn't installed from the factory. It has a very seamless finished install look. So here's what our brake controller looks like installed. On this particular vehicle here, we actually have a custom trim panel insert that we can obtain separately through Redarc. And that's going to just simply pop into one of the unused factory panels, which we can see we have several in the vehicle depending on options. There's also a universal panel we can purchase. If you don't have some of these panels here, then we can just drill into the dash and it still makes for a nice clean finished install look. So Redarc uses these LED light here to pretty much tell you what the brakes are doing as well as what mode you're in. That's basically how they communicate with you and how you're going to be able to read what's going on with the brake controller. Now we have a trailer hooked up here, and while it's hooked up, you're going to see this blue light here. So the blue light lets us know that we have our trailer hooked up. Now what we can do is we can adjust the gain by going back and forth clockwise or counterclockwise. Now what the gain feature does is this is essentially what's going to control how much power we're sending to the brakes. So although it is proportional, we can adjust it further. If we have a heavy load, we'd want to turn it up somewhere between 5 and 10, whereas if we have a smaller load, we'd want to start between 5 and 1 till we get a feel for our brakes and how much force is needed. So once we have the correct setting here, we have two modes of operation here. We have the standard proportional operation, which is going to be controlled with our brake pedal here. As you're going to see, this blue light here is going to go from blue to purple to red. The intensity of the red light is going to vary depending on how much force we're applying to the trailer brakes. So if we put it on a lower setting, we apply our brake pedal here, as you can see it's more of a purple color. But if we turn it up, we should start to see a more intense red light. Just like that. These are pretty much going to be the standard colors and operations you're going to be doing daily with your brake controller. There are some other color lights as well as some sequence and different colors like we said that'll flash. Those are actually going to be error troubleshooting codes. The Redarc brake controller here is going to be able to sense any issues we have with our wiring or brakes on the trailer. And they'll let us know accordingly via the flashing lights in the sequence, which we can cross-reference to our owner's manual. So last but not least, our Redarc brake controller here is going to be compatible with both electric and electric over hydraulic brakes. So pretty much, no matter what kind of brakes you have on your trailer, you're going to be covered with this brake controller. So the first step of our installation here, we want to take our switch here, our control knob, and we need to find a good place to mount this. Now we have quite a few different options for mounting. However, on this particular vehicle here, if we take a look on the driver's side of the dash, closer to where the door is, about where your left knee would be, chances are you're going to have some unused panels, which we see here. There's just these blank plastic slots. We're going to have one up here, two down here, one down here. Yours may vary depending on what options your vehicle comes with. And the reason we're pointing these panels out is because Redarc actually makes a custom mounting bracket here, which we could see is going to monitor, or it's going to mirror the shape of these panels here. So essentially what this is going to do is, this is going to house our control knob, and then we can use this and mount it in one of these unused panels for a very factory-like seamless installation. We're not going to have to do any drilling into our dash. So again, depending on options, you could have some of these panels filled and some of them might be empty, but chances are you're going to have at least one empty. Now we're going to be using this lowermost one here because we think that's going to be the best location for the driver to reach. It's not in the way and it's not going to distract them. So we're going to be going ahead and using this one here, but again, you're free to use any of the other unused panels. And in order to really get to where we need to be and to remove this panel here and then mount everything, we're going to need to remove this dash panel here. So let's go ahead and do that now, and then we'll show you how it's done. So we've already went ahead and done everything that we need to get behind this panel here. We're going to be working. Now we're going to show you what we did here, show you where the fasteners are to help you sort of get these panels off yourself. Now keep in mind, since we already have everything loose, you're obviously going to be using a little bit more force than we are, but we did want to go ahead and do this ahead of time. That way we could show you where all these fasteners are. That way you're pulling in the right spots and we don't damage any of the plastic or trim panels. So the first thing you're going to need to do is, you have this lower threshold panel here, and what we did is, this is essentially just going to pop straight out. But what we did is we took a trim panel tool on the inside here where the carpet is, and we basically just pried this up, and that should release all of the clips. And if we turn this panel over here, we'll show you these push fasteners here, which just go straight down. And also these clips here are going to slide into channels there on the body. We also need to be careful on either end. We're going to have some more fasteners here. But as long as we pull straight out and we're careful not to pry too much on one side, sort of work our way back and forth to release all the clips around the same time, we shouldn't have any issues with damaging it. So we can go ahead and set this aside because the next panel we're going to be removing is going to be right in here where our left foot would be. So in order to remove this panel here, it's going to be hard to see, but on the inside there's going to be a black nut that we can actually loosen by hand. We'll try to give you a better view of that now. So here's that black plastic nut we told you about. You don't need any tool to remove it. You should just be able to sneak a couple fingers in there and give it a couple turns to release it. So here's what it looks like when it comes out. We can go ahead and just set this aside here because now we're going to remove this panel, and again we're just going to have some fasteners which hold it in here this word. So we want to go ahead and pull out away towards us. Just to show you what we were talking about there, those are the fasteners here. It looks like there's only going to be three, one up top, one on the bottom here, and that plastic nut. So the next thing we're going to do now, we're going to come to this lower panel here. We're not actually going to be removing this entirely, but we are going to loosen it enough so we have an area to work behind here. Now if we come down here, we take a look, our panel here is actually covering this, but we're going to have a 10mm bolt here that we need to take out in order to let us pry the panel loose. And then if we jump over on the other side here, we're going to have this black plastic cover here. We're just going to take a small screwdriver here, flathead screwdriver. We're just going to pry that cover off, and then we can use our same 10mm socket to remove that bolt as well. And then once we have both of those bolts out, what we're going to do is we're going to try to pry this panel off. There's going to be some fasteners here at the top which are holding it on. So again, we're just going to sort of gently pry away just like that. I was actually able to get my fingers right here beside the steering column, and that'll give us a good little gripping point here so we can pry and pull this away. Now if we could take this off, but I don't think we're really going to be required to. We just need to be careful that we have some pigtails here. Again, depending on your options, what features and buttons you have here, but we need to make sure we don't pull too much and pulling the wires out the back. We also have our hood latch release mechanism here towards the bottom. That's what this is here. It's connected to this panel, so we want to be careful when we're prying this away that we don't pry it too much to damage any of those things. So the next thing we're going to do is going to vary by our vehicle here. Our particular vehicle here has the factory tow package, which means it comes equipped with the factory 4 and 7-way trailer connector. Now what this allows us to do is, it allows us to use a plug-in harness here for our brake controller because the vehicle is pre-wired for a brake controller. Now the next part of the installation again is going to require a separate part here. We're going to need to get a vehicle specific brake controller adapter here, which we have pictures, which is specific to our Toyota vehicle here. So there's going to be two ends on it. We have this rectangular plug here that's going to plug into the main control for our brake controller. This other end here is going to plug into the port for the tow package or brake controller on our vehicle. So we're going to need to find that now. They're kind of tucked under the dash. They're super hard to see. You really have to crawl under there to be able to get to it. But here is basically what it's going to look like. It's going to be a white square plug here with 3 or 4 pins. Looks like we have 4 pins in here. So we're going to go ahead and find that now. So keep in mind, if you don't have the factory tow package, you're not going to have this port and you cannot use this plug-and-play harness. However, you can still install this brake controller. You're simply going to need a different hardwire harness, and you're going to need to obviously hardwire that in to the vehicle's electrical system. So our factory tow package port, it's going to be tucked behind this driver's side dash panel here. What we need to do is we're going to come in the driver's side footwell here. Let's go ahead and locate our emergency brake pedal, which should be fairly obvious. You should be familiar with that, and that's going to be this little pedal here. Then if we look straight back to this and to the left, we're going to see part of our fuse panel cover here. It's going to have a diagram. And if we look directly behind that, we're going to see a large bundle of wires that are taped in this black electrical tape. We can actually see part of that here. But what we need to do is we need to trace that up. We're just going to use our hand here because taped to this wiring harness here, we're going to have the square connector here. That's going to be for our brake controller. Now we have it here. And again, it's just a white square connector, and it's going to be taped to the existing wiring harness. So in order to get this down, we may need to remove some of the tape, or if our harness is long enough, we may be able to keep it in place and just connect our pigtail, our custom harness to this. That's really going to depend on whether you want to give yourself more room to work, or you would like it to give it a little bit cleaner look and you don't have those wires hanging down. So we should hear it click when we have it locked into place. So it actually wasn't too hard here, but there we go. Now we know it's nice and secure with our connector there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find a place to mount our main control unit here. Now the orientation of the control unit, it doesn't really matter. However, it needs to be affixed to a solid surface, a stable surface rather, that's not going to be moving around. So zip tying it to some wires isn't going to be a good idea. But as long as it's going to be affixed to a stable surface, we should be just fine. Now I went ahead and already planned this out, but essentially on this little kick panel here, if we go back super far here, it's going to be out of the way of our feet. We're not going to have to worry about kicking it, and we're not really going to be able to see it unless we really peek down under there. So I'm personally just going to take some self-tapping screws, and I'm going to screw them into this panel here. We do need to be careful about the wires behind the panel, so just make sure the screws are not going to be, the self-tapping screws we're using, they're going to be very short. And we're also going to be able to prop the panel out a little bit to ensure that we don't damage anything behind it. So keep in mind, we do need to still have access to the other side of the main unit here because we still have to plug in our connector for our control knob. The front side is going to be for the harness that goes to the port on our vehicle. So we're just going to eyeball this here. We're actually using a piece of double-sided tape just to help hold it in place while we get those self-tapping screws in. So now that we have the unit mounted, we can go ahead and make our connections. This large rectangular plug is going to be for the custom wiring harness. We should hear that click into place. And then the connection on the back here is going to be this Ethernet looking cable here. That's going to go to the control knob. We want to make sure we're careful when we're routing this over there because we do have our emergency brake pedal here, and just slightly over here we have our actual brake pedal. So we're going to go ahead and connect that there, but we're going to be careful when we're routing it. We're also going to make sure that we zip tie up any of the loose wires. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make our ground connection here coming from the harness. Now we could just take a self-tapping screw and pretty much just drill anywhere into the body there, sand the surface back a little bit, but in light of not wanting to drill holes into the vehicle, if we peel this panel back a little bit, you're going to see one of those same bolts that we removed earlier right here attaching to this metal bracket. So I'd be willing to bet if we take that off, we could use that as our ground point here for our main module box. So let's go ahead and take a 10mm socket, and let's remove that now. So now that we have that bolt removed, we'll take our white wire, our ground wire here. We're going to route it in the rough location. I'm actually going to come above the hood latch release mechanism, come out here, and we're going to simply just take the bolt, put it through the eyelet there, then we can re-secure it. But that is a bare, unpainted metal surface, so it should be suitable for our ground. So now you can see we have some extra part of our wiring harness and the ground wire here. It's going to be near our emergency brake pedal as well as kind of close to our actual brake pedal. So we don't want that getting caught up and interfering with those functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some zip ties now. We're going to zip tie these wires together to some of the existing wiring up here, or maybe a bracket, just to keep it out of the way so it doesn't fall down. Now we can take our little trim panel insert that we talked about earlier, and that we have the slot removed that we're going to be using. All we need to do is come on the outside here and simply press that into place until it locks. So once we hear it click, we'll just come on the outside here and make sure all the surfaces are flush and it's not turned one way or the other. And if we press on it, it shouldn't be moving at all, and we know it's locked in place. So now that we have the little bezel or panel installed, we can actually take the main body unit to our control knob here. And if we look at the top here, there's going to be it's actually a light, but that's going to be sort of our alignment pin. It's going to line up with the small hole on our bezel here. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go ahead and come on the back side here, and we're just going to set that into position here. And once that is done, we can come around to the front side here. We're going to take our little nut that comes in our kit here. The side with the hex head on the outside is going to be facing us, because this is actually going to be the smaller shoulder area is actually going to go into that hole there and sort of center everything. So we're going to come around to the back side here. I'm just going to apply some pressure, and then I'm just going to stick our little nut on there. I'm just going to begin threading that in. So we do actually have a torque spec for this, but it's pretty small and not a lot of torque wrenches go down to that. So, and again, this can sort of vary depending on the thickness of the panel we're using. So the best rule of thumb is here to take our 12mm socket, and we're just going to sort of play it by feel. We're going to tighten this nut down, and then we're going to install our control knob here, and we're just going to test the function. What we're looking for is we want to have a nice click here, which will vary depending on our panel thickness and how much we tighten this nut. So we're just going to tighten a little bit here. We're going to test fit our knob, make sure we get a nice good audible click, and then we can repeat that until we have sort of the feel that we're looking for. But we do need to make sure that the knob is at a certain position, as well as the knob here on our switch here is going to be turned all the way counterclockwise. But we'll go ahead and show you that now, show that next once we get this nut tightened down. So now that we have, again, we just want to make sure, you can see here this does turn, we want to make sure it's turned all the way counterclockwise. And then that little light, we're just going to use that as our alignment tab here. We're going to press on our control knob, but we want the 0 on the control knob to be aligned with that top portion here, the light, alignment pin, whatever you want to call it. Then we'll just simply press it on, just like that. And then we'll go ahead and test the click here. As we can see, we have a nice audible click here, and that should be perfect. We won't know for certain until we get everything hooked up, and we can test the manual override feature, which is what this is for. So now what we can do is finally the final step here. We're going to take the other end of our data remote cable, whatever you want to call it, and plug it into the back of the panel here. Just like that. Now we can go ahead and button everything up. I'm going to take some zip ties. I'm going to tie off the rest of our cable here so we don't have to worry about it hanging down. Also, if you unplug these top 2 plugs here to give you more room to work, you would want to plug those back in as well. And then we can go ahead and button up all our panels. And the final step here will be to test our brake controller. So now that we have everything installed, we need to go through what Redarc refers to as the active calibration process. Now essentially what this does is it helps the controllers get a sense of the vehicle's direction as well as the brake pedal being applied. So what we need to do now is we need to go ahead and drive around an area here and make some frequent stops. Now we can do this with or without our trailer hooked up. If we do it with the trailer hooked up, we're going to get a better idea of when the calibration process is done, because we're actually going to be able to see some LED lights, which we'll show you here in a second. During the active calibration process, the control knob is going to alternate between a blue and a green light. That lets you know the calibration process is taking place and working. Once it's done and the unit has calibrated itself, we're going to get a solid blue light. Now you can do this, as we mentioned, without the trailer hooked up. However, we're not going to get any LEDs on our control knob there. So we're not really going to get a good indication that the calibration process is complete until we hook up to our trailer. So here's what our LED lights will look like when we're still in the active calibration process. So now we're just going to drive around and make some frequent stops until we get a solid blue light. So now we've went ahead around the parking lot a couple times and we've applied our brakes around 20 times or so. As you can see, we have the solid blue light on our brake controller there, which is going to indicate that our unit is calibrated and ready to go. So now that we have the controller calibrated, we're going to go ahead and hook up our trailer again. If you're still hooked up, that's fine. We're going to go ahead and test out our features now, such as the manual override first. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and turn the gain up our controller all the way up to the max setting of 10 just for demonstration purposes. And then we're going to apply the manual override, which is simply done by clicking down on this knob here. Now if everything was installed correctly, we should see this blue light fade from blue to purple and then eventually to red. Perfect. Now what we can do is we can go ahead and test the brake controller with the brake pedal. Now we should see that same sequence of the color changing from blue to purple to red as well. And there we have it. And that's going to do it for our look and installation of Redarc's Tow Pro Elite Trailer Brake Controller here for our 2018 Toyota 4Runner.